Catherine Caroli, and I wanted to talk about Leonore number 3 as audition material. So I find that preparing this for an audition is really different than playing it in the orchestra. In fact, I think at least the opening is quite a bit more difficult. In the orchestra, you have people around you to tune with and to get feedback from, and especially in the triplet section, you have somebody to play with. All that becomes your own responsibility in an audition. First thing to talk about is tempo. I like to play the opening at 8th note equals around 69. I think that's probably the most effective tempo. A really great idea in the opening is to practice it even slower so that you work on your breath capacity. Really important in the beginning that the fortissimo doesn't have a huge accent, but that you get away from the fortissimo quickly enough into piano that you don't waste a lot of your air. So I'm thinking of it as a very weighted, heavy, slow sort of attack. The alternative is definitely not the right approach. As soon as I play my fortissimo heavy attack, I start my diminuendo quite quickly. At this point, it really becomes about controlling your piano dynamic and making a diminuendo as you descend. Several things here help me. I will often think, to help my legato, of playing as if I had a pickup to the next note. So I'm demonstrating to you by tonguing, I don't know if you can hear it, but almost like a ding, da, yi, da, ya. Because I find that when you're thinking as a pickup to the next note, you'll play more legato. I'm also making sure my airspeed is moving quite quickly in between notes. If you could imagine playing this as if you were in charge of the air and somebody else were in charge of the fingers and you had no idea when they were moving their fingers, that would be the right sort of feeling for this excerpt in order to play legato. Another thing that I do as I'm practicing this is I tend to think that I'm going up rather than down. To me, the line that's going down causes me to go flat and to lose my airspeed. But if I can kind of fool myself into thinking that I'm ascending, I end up having better success with this. Of course, it's really important that you don't play your first fortissimo G sharp, because you'll have a very hard time matching your pianissimo pitch to that in the end. It is important to tongue the third measure extremely lightly and the last note extremely lightly, almost inaudible. So the last thing that I want to talk about is control of your vibrato. I think the vibrato should be very much in the sound, very narrow, not too slow and not too fast, and not particularly noticeable. It's more of a shimmer to make the sound beautiful. The next passage is, keep in mind that you are playing in octaves with the horn. So again, you don't want to use too much vibrato. I think it's nice to make a little bit of a shape here. To make a overall sort of crescendo and diminuendo very, very subtly. The phrase really ends at the downbeat of measure 20. This is not the beginning of the next passage. Oftentimes I hear players play this. But it really should be the culmination of the phrase before. I find that if I get too soft on the quarter note F sharp measure 19, that the following downbeat is going to come out too loud. So I try to save a little space so that I can play that F sharp downbeat of measure 20 softer than the F sharp quarter note before it. It's okay to have a tiny pause before you then play the B. triplet notes go, I find it difficult, even as much as I try to hear the first violins playing, to get the timing right. I find that the best way to do this is to record yourself and listen and to see if you're waiting long enough to play your next entrance of the triplets. In the meantime, it's important that each note have a bounce feeling and a little bit of a taper, and that you're not too short on the eighth notes. You also want to feel like there's a little bit of a sense of direction, but not a crescendo per se. I actually like to aim towards the middle of the three notes. If I aim towards the top note, it sticks out too much. And if I aim for the first note, it tends to sound awkward and I lose the momentum and the forward motion. Again, really important that you're able to play all of this pianissimo and in good time with really beautiful quality of sound. You can practice the high articulated F sharps with the harmonics. In fact, this is challenging, but it's worth doing. If you finger a low B, you can keep the low B fingered and play all three of those B, D sharp, and F sharp notes. Again, this will be challenging. It creates a whole lot of resistance for your lips, but when you go back to the regular fingerings, I think you'll feel that the notes come out with more ease. As far as the solo part of Leonore, or we call it the quick part, several things come into mind. I think it's important not to whack the first low D. A lot of times we're so worried about it coming out that we way overdo it and it distorts the whole feeling of the pickup. This is really a 10-note pickup to a forte piano downbeat. Forte piano is not an accent. In Beethoven's time, it was a very expressive sort of leaning. So I also don't think you have to play a true piano afterwards, but it should be an expressive sort of arrival with vibrato. And then from the phrase, I do feel that it goes to the B. And it's important that you tongue the B and the notes after it as written. I wouldn't clip the slur too much. And I wouldn't clip the last quarter before the rests. The next passage is, I feel, a big 2-measure pick up to the grace note A, G. So I wouldn't start too loudly and I'd have a lot of sense of forward direction. Here too, I wouldn't clip the slurs because it just creates, it ruins the feeling of connected pickups to a downbeat. In other words, it also makes it really hard to control the tongue notes here. So I'm thinking legato. Wouldn't clip that F sharp much either, but I'd make a diminuendo. Same idea here. Taking a big breath for a long pickup to a strong, weak figure. The next section, I find it helpful to actually single tongue, because what can often happen with these repeated notes, they get compressed and go too fast, especially at the end. So that if I single tongue, I feel like I have better control. Again, here I'm making sure to really play the second note of the slur quite connected to the next tongued note. I think it's important here to make a shape with the phrase. It could be a variety of things, but I'll try this one. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but some sort of direction in the phrase. And same with the triplets. And then a super quick breath, you shouldn't take time for this, with a big crescendo in measures 350 and 351. So I'm fortissimo there so that I can have a big contrast to my subito pianissimo D. So as far as the D goes, there are alternative fingerings that you can use. What I like to do, it's tricky, so if you do it, practice it a ton, is I bent my G key ever so slightly so that I don't have to aim up the air so much that I'm fuzzy, which happens with a lot of people in order to not be flat. You could take a little bit of time to set it, but then I'm literally just rolling off. An alternative is a fingering where you're playing the regular D, adding the G sharp key and adding the F key, the first finger of the right hand. It tends to be a little bit sharper. It's easy to play soft. You don't need much air to sustain it. Again, the key, I think, for breathing in this excerpt is to take a super huge breath on your last good opportunity, which is a measure rest before your high A, so that all the other breaths are simply just tiny catch breaths to allow you to get to the end. Make sure that you count the last note and have enough beats on it, and really practice getting the fortissimo to piano in tune. So I'm thinking down a lot in this measure so that I can match my pitch. So I hope that gives you some helpful tips. Thanks for listening, and feel free to offer feedback or comments or requests, katherinecaroli@gmail.com. Thanks.